The second data collection tool that we shall discuss is questionnaires. A questionnaire is a data elicitation method which consists of a series of written questions. In that case, the questions are not oral, they are written. In this method, the respondents are presented with questions or statements to which they are to react either by writing out their answers or choosing among existing answers. This depends on the types of questions. The questions are intended to obtain responses which can then be straightforwardly submitted to statistical analysis. Questionnaires are often used for extensive data collection. They are used to collect huge amounts of data because they are generally quick and easy for participants to complete. Completing a questionnaire can take only a few minutes. Questionnaires are useful in measurements. That is to say, they are used to measure certain phenomena. It is possible to classify the questions in a questionnaire according to their content into three types: factual questions, behavioral questions, and attitudinal questions. Factual questions, which are also called subject descriptors, are used to gather information on who the respondents are, about the respondents themselves, their identity. This includes demographic characteristics like age, gender, and race, if this is relevant to one's study, residential location, marital and socioeconomic status, level of education, religion, occupation, mother tongue, or any other background information. We can say that factual questions gather data or facts on the respondents themselves. The researcher should gather the background information which is relevant for one's research question and should avoid gathering information that is irrelevant. Secondly, behavioral questions are used to investigate the participants' actions, what they do. For example, their lifestyles, their habits, and personal history. Behavioral questions, as I said, aim at gathering data on what people do. If we take, for example, the context of second language studies, the behavioral questions may be about the use of teaching methodologies, for example, learning strategies, correction techniques. Of course, the questions should be relevant to whether the respondent is a teacher or a learner. The last category of questions according to their content are attitudinal questions. These are used to discover what people think, their attitudes, their opinions, their beliefs, their interests, and their values. Like any research tools, questionnaires have strengths and weaknesses. Firstly, questionnaires are very efficient regarding time, effort, and financial resources. That is to say, they are quicker and cheaper. They do not require the same skills as is the case of interviews. Questionnaires permit researchers to gather large-scale data, very huge data, in a short time. This is simply done because samples which receive questionnaires are very large samples. Sometimes hundreds or thousands of people can take a questionnaire. The analysis of data is easy and fast, especially if it is electronically treated. If the researcher, for example, uses Google Form, the results are analyzed on the spot. Now we come to talk about the disadvantages or the weaknesses of using questionnaires. The first weakness is that when using a questionnaire, the researchers force their perspectives on the participants through the questions. This happens because most of the time the questions in a questionnaire are closed-ended. That is to say, the options are already prepared for the respondent, and there is no room for a personal or a unique answer. The second weakness is that questionnaires provide superficial data. These data are usually in the form of numbers. It is true that numbers are powerful, but numbers remain as a powerless tool because they do not involve deeper meanings. That is why sometimes researchers who use questionnaires have a follow-up stage, which is using an interview after the questionnaire to go deeper into some points within the questionnaire. The third weakness is that questionnaires may involve unreliable and non-motivated respondents. Here, the respondent may not say the truth. If you want to check the performance, for example, of a respondent on a given skill, or to ask them about their proficiency in a language, if a respondent gives you an answer, this does not necessarily mean that this answer is true. And here, other tools like tests would be better. Also, the respondent may not be motivated to participate or to take the questionnaire, and this will influence the quality of the answers. The third or the next problem with questionnaires, because they are written, sometimes some respondents have literacy problems. They cannot read well, or they have difficulty in understanding written material, so using a questionnaire would not be appropriate. Next, the researcher is sometimes unable to check the seriousness and accuracy of answers, because the answering the questions is not done face-to-face. Also, this happens because the answers are written. Questionnaires also involve the participant's self-deception. That is to say, seeing the world the way the respondent wishes it, rather than the way it is in reality. Another weakness in using questionnaires or written questions is that people sometimes, or the respondents, have the tendency to choose what sounds or what seems good and avoid being negative. Here they try to please the researcher. This happens especially when they talk about their behavior or when they talk about their attitudes. Also, the respondents may have the tendency to overgeneralize their judgments. Here, this always happens due to the influence or the attempt to be positive. Finally, a long questionnaire, especially if it contains a lot of pages, can be subject to inaccuracy due to fatigue factors. The respondent sometimes gets tired of answering the questions, especially a long list of questions, and that's why the answers themselves are not accurate or exact. In spite of all these weaknesses, many researchers tend to use questionnaires rather than other tools simply because they are easy to administer and they are standardized. Also, they are very easy to analyze. Now we discuss the structure of a questionnaire. Since the questionnaire is a written document, it has a standardized structure that the researchers should know about. It has sections that should be followed. The first section is the title. A questionnaire should have a title. The title generally suggests the area of investigation. For example, a questionnaire on the attitudes of teachers of writing on the use of a certain strategy. This is usually extracted from research questions. The second element in a questionnaire is the instructions. Usually we have two types of instructions. A general instruction, this is called the introduction. Of course, the heading introduction is not used. It takes the form of a paragraph that appears at the very beginning of the questionnaire. This general instruction should be provided at the beginning about what is generally required from the participant. The researcher explains what he wants in general from the participant to do. This is something about the study as a whole. Of course, this should not be very explicit in order not to influence the responses of the participants. The next type of instructions are specific instructions for each new task. Because the questionnaire has other sections, it is necessary to give an instruction for each section. The specific instructions should be clear enough and they should not allow multiple interpretations. For example, another point is that they should be expressed in a polite form. The third section is the questionnaire items. We mean by the term items questions. The questions themselves. This is the body of the questionnaire. Usually, the body of the questionnaire has sections. The first section is the demographic section, and the second one is the main part. Here, the main part may have subsections as well. The demographic section concerns the participants' demographic information. Facts about the participants. Typically, it includes categories for the participants to select from. That is to say, the questions are closed-ended. The main part here includes both open-ended and closed-ended questions. The third element is usually the largest element in a questionnaire. The fourth element includes extra information. This is a brief supplementary information part in which the author can request further marginal data, like contact mode, how to contact the researcher, questionnaire returning method, how should the respondent return the questionnaire, or any note that the researcher would like to add. Here, this section is just a marginal part in the questionnaire. At the end, the researcher should add a closing thank you. The participants should be thanked for their participation. It is important for the researcher to know how to write questionnaire items. And in fact, these items have a lot of forms or types. They can be categorized into two major types: the closed-ended questions and the open-ended questions. The researcher can use only closed-ended questions or open-ended questions, but it is preferable to mix both types. In a questionnaire, the most common question type is the closed-ended questions. The major benefit of closed-ended questions is that their analysis is clear-cut and leaves no space for rater bias. It does not leave space for the subjectivity of the analyst, because the answers themselves are clear. It's not possible for the researcher or the analyst to add any further interpretation. And this is a high degree of objectivity. Therefore, these questions are sometimes called objective items. These items can be of the following types, which appear in the figure. Here, the first type of closed-ended questions, so they are called closed-ended questions or sometimes closed-ended questions. The first type I said is the rating scale type. The rating scale type. These questions have a scale. It means some points which are ordered. The first category or the first type of rating scales is Likert scale. The Likert scale contains degrees. For example, strongly agree, agree, neither agree nor disagree, disagree, and strongly disagree. These are the points of the scale, and they are ordered from the lowest to the highest. The next type of scale is the semantic differential scale. They concern difficulty, so they are ordered from the lowest point to the highest, or vice versa. For example, the first point is difficult and the last point is easy, and in between there are other degrees which are decided by the researcher. In both types, the respondent will choose only one answer, and this will be easy to calculate for the researcher. The next type is the numerical rating scale. Here, the respondent is given numbers, like for example from 1 to 5, and each number has a meaning. This has to do with the frequency of doing something. For example, 1 means not at all, 2 means not really, 3 means so-so, 4 means quite a lot, and 5 means very much. This is very suitable to talk about behaviors in behavioral questions. Next, the next type of rating scales is the true-false. Here, the respondent has two options, either yes or no. Another category of close-ended questions is multiple choice. Here, the researcher provides the respondent with choices, like for example A, B, C, and sometimes D or more, with text here. For example, I speak English, I speak French, I speak Arabic. And the respondent has to choose one or more. This is to be specified by the researcher. Rank order questions are the other type of close-ended questions. Here, the researcher provides a list of items or statements, and he asks the respondent to provide numbers for these statements. In a way, the respondent will order the items, for example, from the least necessary to the most necessary. For example, the researcher will provide the respondent with a list of language skills, writing, reading, speaking, and listening, and according to the respondent's situation or occupation, he would order the skills according to their importance for him. Another type is called numeric items. Here, this involves specifying a particular value within an anticipated range of numbers. The researcher provides a range of numbers. For example, how old are you? This is the question. And the options are 15, 20, 21, 25, 26, 30. Here, the respondent will choose the range where his age falls. At last, we have checklists or checkboxes. This involves marking items that apply in a list. For instance, the question is, what are the characteristics of a good teacher? And the researcher provides a number of characteristics in the form of a list, either phrases or statements, and then he asks the respondent to mark the characteristics that he thinks are the characteristics of a good teacher. Here the respondent may choose more than one answer. In the case of multiple choice questions, he chooses only one answer, but in the case of checklists, he may have more than one answer. Then the researcher will calculate the frequency of those characteristics which are more common among the respondents. Now we come to the second major category of questionnaire items. These are the open-ended questions. In the open-ended questions, the researcher does not provide possibilities of answer. He leaves this to the respondent. That's why they are open-ended. Here they have 4 types. The first type is the specific open. Here the researcher asks about concrete pieces of information. For example, what is your first language? The second type or kind is the clarification open-ended question, and these usually come after yes or no questions, like explain why. This is a clarification open-ended question, or it can appear in the form of please specify. Another way of writing an open-ended question is to choose the sentence completion. For example, the following statement is provided: one thing I like about this activity is, and then the answer is left to the respondent. In language studies, those studies which try to elicit information about the respondent's proficiency level, usually sentence completion is used. Finally, open-ended questions can appear in the form of can require a short answer, like, what did you like about the workshop? Here, the respondent obviously will provide a precise piece of information. We come now to the last part about questionnaires. About designing questionnaires, we'll provide some tips. The first thing that should be emphasized when designing a questionnaire is the wording and the order of the sections. The wording of a questionnaire should be clear. The items or everything that is included in a questionnaire should not have multiple interpretations. So the words should be carefully selected. The researcher also should avoid using highly technical terms which are ambiguous for a non-specialist. He should look at the questionnaire from the angle of the participant and not from the theoretical angle of the researcher. So the language should be simple. The sections of the questionnaire should be ordered carefully. The questions and the items themselves have to be thoughtfully ordered, and this is related to the aims of the study. Next, the researchers can design their own questionnaires. They create their own questionnaires. Another option is that they can use an existing model questionnaire taken from another study. But in case they do this, they have to recognize or acknowledge the source of the questionnaire. When using others' models, the researcher should acknowledge having borrowed or adapted it. Next, in case the researcher develops an original questionnaire, his own questionnaire, the researcher may refer to the related literature. he should extensively read the relevant literature to gain more knowledge about the topic and to gather some initial content for the questionnaire items. If the researcher does not read sufficiently the relevant literature and previous studies, and because the questionnaire is most of the time contains close-ended questions, the questionnaire may generate very poor data. It is also recommended that researchers interview a small number of participants, like students, teachers, administrators, etc. This depends on the study, to reach the required content for their questionnaires. So here, in that case, the interview is used just as a tool to find the categories for the questionnaire. Finally, it is important that questionnaires are well formatted, piloted, and non-ambiguous. Formatting here has to do with the shape of the questionnaire, the writing, the font type, the size of the text. Piloting means using the questionnaire with a small sample, a few participants, in order to see whether its content is adequate or not, and to be able to make some modifications before administering the questionnaire to the larger sample. The items of the questionnaire, as I said previously, should not be ambiguous. They should be clear enough. And finally, the length of the questionnaire should be convenient. It shouldn't be an extremely long questionnaire so that the respondent does not get tired of answering or responding to the questionnaire.